Welcome to our careers webinar on the interesting and exciting topic, how to establish an international career in law. This webinar will explore the diverse perspectives and experience of our panellists who have lived and worked overseas in countries including the UK, Hong Kong and the US. We will learn about the challenges in navigating the differences in jurisdictions, the cultural and lifestyle nuances, the highlights and learnings along the way. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are sitting at this time and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I am pleased to welcome our first speaker, Ross Dakin. A little bit about Ross. Ross is a qualified lawyer with over 15 years experience as a lawyer and legal recruiter in Brisbane and overseas. Ross holds a Bachelor of Laws and Bachelor of Arts from the University of Queensland. He began his career in recruitment in 2004 in the London head office of a global agency and worked in their financial services regulatory and compliance team covering the UK and Europe market before moving into the legal recruitment team. During this time, he placed lawyers in private practice in Magic Circle UK and US firms. Returning to Australia, Ross practiced as a solicitor with a respected Queensland law firm before establishing the legal function, recruitment function for a national search and selection company in Brisbane. He then reconnected with his friend and colleague while working at a Brisbane boutique agency before establishing Peppercorn Recruitment. So welcome, Ross.
Thank you.
What I thought we could just start off with is perhaps if you can just give us an overview of your career to date, including maybe just a couple of the significant highlights.
Yeah, now sort of 15, 16 years since I graduated as a lawyer at UQ. Highlights, or where to begin? Well, as I say, I'll sort of start where we are now. I've got a legal recruitment business based in Brisbane where we predominantly recruit for lawyers in the Brisbane market, but also certainly at least again post-COVID and before COVID, overseas is picking up again. I graduated my law degree in 2004 and wasn't sure at the time whether or not I wanted to be a lawyer or not. So I thought I'd just take a year off and sort of try and work out what might be my next plan. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, we decided to go via Japan, where we taught English for 6 months and then arrived in London, not really necessarily with any plans, but maybe just an opportunity to sort of see what was out there. I fell into recruitment, working for a big global agency over there. And in hindsight, it was a hell of a lot of fun. It was sort of pre-GFC days. And it ended up being the best part of 5 years away that I was overseas. As you mentioned before, my role initially focused on contract work in the regulatory space. Obviously, financial services in London's a big thing, and then moved into the legal recruitment team, where a lot of what I was doing was actually headhunting Australian lawyers to go and work in the UK. That sort of came to an end when we got married. We decided we'd move back to Australia, had a year-long honeymoon, which was a lot of fun, which coincided with the GFC. So it was actually pretty good timing, and came back to Australia. And I thought, you know what, I'll give law a practice, give practice of law a go. And so I had 2 years doing that, which I must admit it probably wasn't for me, the actual practice of law, having gone from very much sort of a client-facing role to being a graduate again, and living a life in 6-minute units. It was a bit of a challenge, but I ended up getting back into recruitment, and sort of for the last sort of 12, 13 years here in Brisbane, that's pretty much what I've been doing.
Okay, so never kind of wanted to go back into practice, or not?
Yeah, it's funny, I think maybe my judgment was perhaps a little bit clouded with law, having recruited in the UK sort of pre-GFC, seeing the incredible hours that were worked by lawyers, particularly in the big US firms in London at the time. And I thought, you know what, I don't particularly want to do that. When I come back here to Brisbane, newly married, had a young family, and time had moved on, I think, for me at that stage. So I was cognizant of the fact I wanted to practice law, but I wanted to work in a smaller law firm where you tend to see a lot more probably than you would otherwise in perhaps a top tier. And it's quite funny, if I'd had perhaps my time again, and my business partner, Peter, he's actually an Allen's lawyer by training. He often says he'd still be a lawyer if he was in a small firm. Conversely, I'd probably be a lawyer if I was in a top tier firm. So yeah, it's one of those things in life and with law that you don't quite know what you've got until you actually try it.
No. But kind of interesting though, like having worked as a lawyer and then being a recruiter, you would really know firsthand what companies are looking for as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at CVs for a living, as I like to say, it certainly wasn't a career that I had in mind when I finished my law degree. It was, as I say, I was only going to be a year-long adventure, which sort of turned into, by the time we got home, almost 5 years. So
So it's all about just going overseas and exploring the world at the time, or a few countries, rather than an actual intentional, deliberate desire to go and work overseas.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, there's a couple of ways of doing it. You could do it, the sort of the carefree way, which is what my wife or girlfriend at the time and I did, which was just to go there and just see what happens, with no real sort of open-ended plan, but, with the view of obviously always coming back to Australia. Or you could do it perhaps more traditional way, which is to get some experience under your belt. And then use that when you get to a different market. So there's definitely two ways of going about it. And I don't think either's right or wrong. They're both a heck of a lot of fun, or at least they should be. That's the whole idea, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. So if you had wanted to practice when you were over in the UK, how hard would that have been?
For me, well, as a law graduate, very, quite simply because I'd be up against all the other law graduates from all the other UK universities, and so that is something that I would obviously caution against. If you wanted to go and practice as a lawyer in the UK, my suggestion is you've got to get runs on the board before you even contemplate going over there and trying to practice as a lawyer. Certainly practicing as a lawyer. That's not to say you wouldn't get opportunities, possibly in support type roles within law firms or corporates. But I would suggest if you're going to practice law, you need to be admitted here in Australia as well.
So admitted plus maybe a couple of years post-admission experience in a particular practice area or generalist? What do you think?
No, generally at least 2 years post-admission experience. And the reason for that is because the way Australian lawyers, or indeed Commonwealth lawyers more generally are viewed in the UK, is you tend to sort of take 2 years of your post-admission experience off, and you're considered then a newly qualified lawyer in the UK. So, if you're a 4-year lawyer here in Australia, for all intents and purposes in the UK, firms will consider you a 2-year lawyer. So my suggestion would be probably you want to sort of start looking at least with sort of 2 years, possibly 3 before, taking the plunge.
Right. And any particular experience do you think would be useful? Would it be more useful like if you were coming from, say, working in a private, more commercial firm versus, say, working in government, or is it more about the individual?
Oh, look, there's a bit of that. I think, if look, there is no right answer. I sort of look at what my experience was. I had no experience when I turned up overseas. I think I had 2 weeks worth of work experience in the legal department of a large corporate, of all places in Sydney, and found a job in London. I think if you're a lawyer coming over, traditionally, you want to be in one of those sort of front-end transactional, practice areas, whether it be corporate or banking or projects or construction, simply because, a lot of the law is very similar. I think, the challenge for litigators, for example, it's a lot harder. It's a different rule book. We have different procedural rules and the like, in different states of Australia. They're different in the UK. So, where a lot of Australian lawyers have really sort of found a very easy sort of path over is if you are from a well-regarded larger firm, doesn't necessarily have to be top tier, but at least a large firm, and in practice areas with transferable skills, as I say, corporate in particular, construction, projects and so forth. That's not to say, and look, there's plenty of examples also of, employment lawyers and the like, but, I think it's a stretch for, say, family lawyers or criminal lawyers, perhaps, to make the move over. And this is, I'll point out, Susan, I think, a lot of lawyers, and, being the risk-averse types that we are, we're always looking for red flags. A lot of lawyers want to get jobs lined up before they go, and that's absolutely fine. That's understandable. But that's really sort of limited to, the big firms that are used to big, Australians coming over, and in those sort of particular practice areas. If you're a planning environment lawyer, it's going to be hard. If you're, as I say, a family lawyer or a criminal lawyer, it's going to be very hard. And it's not to say it can't be done, but
Yes.
to think that you're going to get a job lined up before you go over, I think, is a stretch.
Right. So it kind of would be more easier than if you were in a firm that perhaps even had global offices, and then you could do a secondment or that way.
There is that. The other thing, and look, this is again, it's for lawyers, throwing caution to the wind is always, a bit of a challenge. But I think there'd be absolutely no harm in sort of ripping the Band-Aid off and actually just going over there and just giving it a go, because often, and I see this as a recruiter these days, often an employer will come to you with a need for a staff member. Now, they come to you with a need because they needed someone yesterday. If you can't get to the UK or wherever it might be for, let's say, 4 weeks notice at your current employer, 2 weeks to sort of pack up, you're looking at 2 months, 3 months, sometimes, time has sort of moved by. Whereas if you find yourself in the UK, and I'm using this as an example, immediately available, then, for any employer, they're like, well, perfect. If your visa's there and you're ready to go, you're one step ahead of the competition anyway. That's a huge, huge, huge fillip for anyone who's actually actively looking for work. If you're immediately available, that straight away puts you to the front of the queue. And as I say,
so just kind of go for it. You're saying,
I think so.
Don't overthink it. And I suppose that also depends on your situation, your circumstances, if you're looking at going on your own versus if you've got a whole family that's going over with you. Yeah.
Look, I agree. I mean, it is a big ask, there's no question. But I've seen so many incredible success stories and certainly of mates of mine, who did a similar thing, who didn't have a job when they arrived over in the UK, and just started pounding the pavement. And I always sort of say it's a full-time job looking for a job anyway, or at least it should be. But when you're in a different city and you're sort of running out of pounds very quickly, there's an added incentive to try and find a job very, very quickly. So
in terms of how the market works over there, with the whole idea of kind of networking being very important, would you suggest that people utilise their networks here to kind of start networking with people over there, or would you do it once you got there? Would you join any associations or institutes, or how do you navigate that if you don't maybe have a huge network overseas, which I imagine a lot of people might not?
Yeah, a lot of people don't, and I don't think there's the same, perhaps, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there seems to be the same sort of emphasis on a need for a network. I think the network you want when you get to any new town or any new city is to have some familiar, accents or voices that you can talk to in person. I think scratch a bit deeper, and I'm sure you'd know someone who knows someone who might be able to, put you on the couch for a week or whatever it might be. And people are generally very accommodating when you first arrive, if, as I say, you don't have a job lined up, for example. But in terms of sort of, actively pursuing sort of networks, I think those sorts of things come once you're there. You've got to remember, and I think, this is where whilst it's a rite of passage for so many Australian young professionals, and it's not just limited to lawyers, it's other professionals, whether it be accountants or those who work in finance, going overseas is a great opportunity. But particularly, say, for legal, Australian lawyers and indeed New Zealand lawyers are really well regarded in the UK for one main reason is they're often well trained, which is a start. Two, they can join a firm and are, again, generally profitable seat, like a profitable employee, because, they can charge out and they understand how law firm economics works. But the critical one is that they're often only there for sort of, let's say, 2, 3, maybe 4 years as a lawyer, and then they head back to Australia. Now, the beauty of that, of course, is that it doesn't put any noses out of joint when you're, chasing partnership, for example, in a big firm. There may be sort of some local employees who might sort of think, well, hang on, these Australians are taking our jobs, and you can get sucked into sort of the politics of, say, a law firm environment. Australian lawyers aren't like that. So they're just there to work hard, earn good money, have a good time, and then leave without, having the tricky questions of, all right, what's next? Partnership? Are you staying? Or and sure, there are no shortage. I mean, you only have to jump onto the websites of a lot of the big firms in London to see no shortage of Australian and New Zealand lawyers that have ended up actually staying there and are partners of these big magic circle firms or US firms to show that some people never come back, but by and large, they're great. They're viewed as great employees because they work hard and want to have fun and won't get in the road when it comes to chasing partnership.
Okay, all right. Oh, that's good to know. So what, in terms of like looking for opportunities, what type of how would you do that? Through recruitment firms like yourselves, or would you go online and do it? Like, what's the best way to try and find those roles? Yeah,
for sure. And again, I think it also all comes back down to where you're currently working at the moment. If, as I say, if you're let's say a 3-year corporate M&A lawyer working for a top tier firm in Brisbane, Sydney or Melbourne or Perth or Adelaide doing quality work, then there's a very real likelihood that you'll be able to secure a job before you go. My advice would be to partner with 1, maybe 2 recruiters and sort of get a real good understanding of who are the right firms, in that market to approach. And then the rest is pretty much all done. The beauty of it these days is so easy to interview with Zoom and Teams and other, video conferencing facilities. So that's not a problem at all. The challenge, of course, comes back to what practice area you are practicing in. Now, I've mentioned before, litigators, generally speaking, that's quite hard. That's not to say, there's good jobs in the, in offshore jurisdictions like the Cayman Islands or, the Channel Islands, if you want to live in the English Channel for a little while. But, generally speaking, insurance and, litigation and, other sort of non-front end practice areas, it is a bit more of a challenge. And my advice to lawyers in that situation would be, possibly just get there and give it a go. I know it's easier said than done, but once, as I say, you are there, it is a full-time job looking for a job, and you'd be amazed at the opportunities that tend to open up. For lawyers who have worked in, government, or probably who have worked in, smaller firms here that, won't necessarily get a look in, I'd always sort of say, if you're a suburban solicitor doing general commercial, sales and acquisitions of, small businesses, is it likely that you're going to get a job working for a big, Wall Street firm in London? I would say no. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. But there's no shortage of other legal opportunities in the UK as well. And I think, you can't look past areas like, for example, if London was the place you wanted to be, to go and work for one of the many borough councils over there. There's lots of Australian and New Zealand lawyers that would work in those places. Likewise,
what would those roles kind of be then?
Oh, look, anything from sort of just doing general commercial contracting for a borough council to, you know, some disputes work, I guess. You know, and you look, the salaries are going to be nowhere near what you're going to get working
yes.
for the big firms. Of that, there's no doubt. But having said that, you won't be working weekends and you won't be working until sort of 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. You know, it'll be an 8:30 to 5:30 job, and you can use that extra time to either go to the pub or go traveling. You know, so it is what you want. You know, it is what you make of it.
Right. Okay. Well, that's also good to know, because not everyone is going to come from those ideal kind of grounds and backgrounds that we're talking about.
And sorry, and the other thing also is worth pointing out, you know, there's also a much better contracting market, I would say, certainly in the UK as well. So again, it might be, you know, working on, I don't know, again, depending on experience, you know, like a big discovery matter for, you know, a client, you know, for a law firm where you might work for, you know, Freshfields on one matter for 4 months on an hourly rate, finish that, go traveling for 2 months, come back and find another one somewhere else. And so there's all sorts of different options. Now, I could go down a rabbit hole of, are they good for your experience? That's a moot point. You know, again, as someone who looks at CVs, I'd sort of suggest it depends on what you want out of your career anyway. If you wanted to chase partnership at a top tier firm, probably wouldn't do any good, but I think, you know, it's all about having an experience, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's all about the way you pitch it as well. And there'd be a lot of skills that you would take away from those experiences, which are more life skills as well.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So just a couple of last questions. In terms of then what individuals can do to position themselves now, apart from the different experiences and opportunities where they may be working, is there any other particular skills or knowledge they could be working on or building that might be impressive overseas? Yeah,
it's funny. I think, and this is certainly advice I give to any job seeker, whether they're Australian, whether they're overseas or the like. I think every single lawyer has their own unique situation. And you've really got to sort of focus on what is it you want out of your career anyway. I mean, is it to go to the UK to actually improve your career and sort of get ahead on the ladder? Or, and sorry if I keep using the UK as an example, but, you know, it's the same if you go to Singapore or Hong Kong or wherever it might be, or the Middle East. You know, why are you going overseas? And you can certainly further your career by going overseas, you know, don't get me wrong. You can also make it very hard to come back from overseas. Like, it's quite interesting. I've got a very good friend of mine who was out from the UK. She's general counsel of a large international corporate based in the UK, and it's actually a real challenge for her to find something good that will pay well back in Australia. She's desperately keen to come back, but it's a real challenge. So shot the lights out over there, but is now finding it hard to come back. So but going back to your initial question, I think not so much is there anything you can do to get yourself overseas, it's why are you going overseas in the first place. And that's a question you probably need to ask, you know, as a lawyer, you need to ask yourself. Because if you know what you want to do in your career, you'll know whether it's a good idea as to whether or not it's worth going over. Or you could end up like me, where, you know, you didn't really have any idea of why you were going overseas, just because you just knew you didn't want to practice law straight away, and you fall into something totally different. In my case, recruitment. And it was only a sort of a stopgap measure, and I never really took it seriously until I got over there and went, actually, you know what, I kind of like this job. There's times where I hate this job, but I think people could say that about every job, right? And then came back and thought, right, now's my time to practice law. And I'm glad I did. It sort of a lot of suspicions that were in my mind anyway. I think if you want to go overseas, you'll know why you want to go overseas. I'd highly recommend it. I think it was, certainly looking back at it, it was some of the best years of my life. You know, I saw an incredible amount, learned a lot professionally. Had some incredible meetings, going to some of my in-house clients, whether it was Goldman Sachs on Fleet Street's office, or
Wow.
the global head of legal for some of the big banks over there, or and I was still in my 20s and not really quite sure what I was doing at half of these places, but it was certainly a life experience and one I'll never forget.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes for just such a much more kind of richer and colourful experience as well, doesn't it? And it's kind of makes it stand out when you are telling your story. Last question. What advice would you give to your younger self, even though to me it sounds like you did the best thing, but is there any kind of regrets or anything else that you would say to those people that are maybe just sitting on the border?
Yeah, it's funny. Law's a funny profession. If there's anything I've seen over the last sort of 15 or plus years and almost 20 years since I graduated, it is a hyper competitive profession. It's not like what you see on TV. Speak to anyone who's been in practice of law, and it's a hard slog. There's no shortcuts. It's not a profession you can knock off at 5:30 and just wash your hands and think, oh, right, I'm done, and walk away for the weekend. It's the younger me, perhaps. It's a really hard question. I mean, I guess I am pretty happy with where I'm at the moment. I do enjoy what I do. I do enjoy talking to lawyers about their careers and sort of seeing some of the mistakes people have made. I say other mistakes. I think law is a pretty unforgiving profession. It's hard to make a mistake and then make up for it. I think you're allowed one mistake on your CV, 2, start asking questions, and 3, there's alarm bells from any prospective employer. So I always sort of say to lawyers, be very careful about every move that you make, because one of the first questions that you'll ever get asked in an interview is, why did you leave your last job? It doesn't happen if you're an IT contractor. It doesn't happen if you're a accounts payable person. It doesn't, but if you're a lawyer, every job you have to explain why you left your previous one. And if you don't have good, solid, sound reasons as to why, it's going to make, a prospective employer really think twice about employing you. So what would be my younger regret? Maybe, I don't know. If I'd probably worked harder at uni and got better marks, who knows where I might have been. I think I, what we used to call jokingly back then, a gentleman's degree, and I perhaps didn't sort of push my career hard enough early on. But if I had, I might have been somewhere else, who knows where.
Maybe not even in law.
Maybe not even in law, at least sort of loosely associated with it. But I think, again, if I can give any advice perhaps to sort of younger lawyers, is that, you can't do the job half pregnant, for better word. You've got to be committed. In fact, some of the best advice I ever got from someone who's very close to me, who is, for all intents and purposes, a very successful lawyer, or has a very successful had a very successful legal career, has moved into an executive senior role in a large Australian business. And he said to me very early on, I think it was about 4th year uni, he said, if you don't love the law's not for you. And I remember at the time, it sort of really seared in my mind. He said, the best lawyers are the ones that are absolutely passionate about the job. And it's true. Unfortunately, I do speak to a lot of lawyers who are unhappy, who probably did law because they thought it was, it sounded good. But I think, if you're really going to love being a lawyer, you've got to love the law. I love talking to lawyers. I love talking to because there's a lot of smart people out there that do law. There's people, who might have been pretty average at maths and science like what I was, but considered myself reasonably intelligent, and probably thought, well, I'll do law because at least it still sounds good, but never had the driving passion perhaps to be a lawyer.
But it's kind of nice that you're still working in that space, and you're still working with lawyers and aspiring lawyers. So,
and
that's a great kind of happy medium.
Yeah, it is great. And look, there's a lot to like about the law. I think, you can really sort of, you can bring change. There's a lot of good life skills, I think, that you get out of being a lawyer. I think don't ever sort of, underestimate what skills you can achieve by getting a law degree and becoming a lawyer. But I think, if it's going to be your profession moving forward, understand that it is a challenging one. It's one that requires a lot of hard work, and it doesn't necessarily pay that well. That's the other interesting thing.
Yes.
The pay is getting a lot better in Australia. It's certainly compared to overseas. Australian lawyers, I think, are massively underpaid. But again, there's plenty of other avenues you can take your career with a law degree, that's for sure.
Okay, no, thank you. That's wonderful. A big thank you to you, Ross, for kind of sharing your insights and your experience. I think I really kind of appreciate your honesty and some really good insights that you've got from being in the profession as well. So. Yeah. Thank you, and it will be good to help people kind of think about their decisions and maybe not overthink. Maybe they just also need to have a little bit of Nike in them too.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think if I'm going to say one last thing, as I say, if you're sort of umming and ahhing about going overseas, it probably means that you do want to go deep down, but don't let the red flags of not having a job or a place to stay get in your road. I think looking back, I had none of those. Wasn't going to go there for long, and it just opens up a whole new different world of opportunity when you're outside your comfort zone. And as I say, I look back and go, it's probably the best thing we ever did. And who knows where, as I say, your legal career can take you overseas.
You might have to do another stint, Ross.
No. Yeah, I've got three young girls.
Okay.
I'd have to drag with me.
No, maybe just a holiday then.
Yeah, gonna get old for that, but no, maybe a holiday. Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks,
I'm
Susan.
just gonna say goodbye to you now. Appreciate that.